Hi, it's Jacquie Franciulli for Gators Territory, and we're here back with On the Beat, and we have Gainesville Suns Graham Hall and Gator Bates Kassidy Hill, and we're here counting down to the big matchup against Miami, and obviously we've been following the team for fall camp, and obviously this last week for game week. And guys, aren't you just excited to actually play a game of football and stop asking these questions over and over again?
Yes, I've watched way too much HGTV, so I need football back. And yeah, we talked to Michael P. Ryan yesterday, and I think we talked to him for like 5 minutes, and it was like, well, what else are we going to ask him? The same thing for the 13th time. So, yes, let's move on to something new. I'm excited to get football back.
Yeah, how many times can we ask about the depth issues in the secondary, or how about Amari Burney playing two positions? And Graham, you talked about Amari Burney and how he's going to be a very versatile defender for Florida this year.
Yeah, with Voshon Joseph with the Bills, Florida's really looking for a new between-the-gaps linebacker, and Amari Burney was the guy who many expected coming out of Tampa being a safety. Many expected him to eventually be that star. Well, he is going to play star for Florida this year. He's also going to be playing at linebacker, where he's been learning under David Reese. That's a guy that they're really going to count on this year, and I'm excited to see how he does. From early reports of fall camp, he was really showing out in that new position, and that's a lot to learn for a guy who's played multiple positions throughout his high school and now his collegiate career, guys.
Yeah, I remember covering him as a recruit. He was such a speedy guy, but such a big frame. So a lot of coaches wanted just to straight and put it at linebacker, but Florida saw some potential at both of those positions.
Yeah, absolutely, and it makes sense why. I mean, you look at his coverage ability, and they're certainly going to need a linebacker who can drop into coverage. That's something that James Houston's been working on as well, and admitted yesterday that's probably the biggest thing keeping him and holding him back right now. But Amari Burney is a guy who when he hits you, I mean, you're not going anywhere. One of the most sound tacklers on the team, and if he can end up being a true cover corner or a true star, Florida really has a true weapon on their hands.
Yeah, Christian Robinson told me that Amari Burney is really intelligent and has really learned the game well on Kassidy. That's great news to hear, especially when you think of the secondary that not only lost C.J. McWilliams to an injury to his Achilles, but then you got John Huggins that was dismissed, and then there's questions about Brad Stewart, who was seen wearing a red non-contact jersey on Monday.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of issues with the secondary, but hearing the reports that Amari Burney can move to star, that he's going to back up Trey Dean there, that if need be, Jeremiah Moon can even move back to star, all of a sudden I'm starting to sit there and say, maybe we should stop worrying so much about the Florida secondary. You know you have the best cornerback duo in the country in C.J. Henderson and Marco Wilson. Now the questions are going to be, what happens if one of them goes down? Well, if you have that backup there at the star with Amari Burney, with Jeremiah Moon, Trey Dean can feasibly move back to corner if need be. He's also going to be able to drop back into safety if they need him to. So the biggest question was going to be at the star position, but now that you know they have those pieces there that they can move somebody in, all of a sudden you can move Trey Dean to corner, you can move Trey Dean to safety, you can move Brad Stewart back over to free. You know, you have the pieces there to mess around with, and so yeah, you're going to want a few more. I mean, Chris Still transferring out hurt him, John Huggins being dismissed. C.J. McWilliams tearing his Achilles just for depth-wise, that hurt him. But they have the pieces there that I think they can move him around. And that was already Grantham's defensive mindset anyways. His scheme was get my best 11 players on the field. I don't have to run a specific 4-3 or 3-4 or a nickel or a dime secondary defense. I just want to get my best 11 on the field. And so I feel like he's got enough there with those 11 and maybe even 2 or 3 to back them up that he can move those around, and that secondary is going to be – I'm more confident about the secondary today than I was a week ago, is what it boils down to.
It must be nice for Todd Grantham, too, when you look at that linebacker depth, when you see James Houston and Ventrell Miller waiting there, and then they can move Amari Burney to star.
Exactly, because if they can move Amari Burney to star, then they can bring in, like you said, Houston. They've got the pieces there, and they've got David Reese there in the center. You know, as long as he doesn't go down, they're fine. It's that outside linebacker that they need to play around with these first couple of games. I think they can do that against Miami. They can definitely do it against Middle Tennessee, and kind of play around and figure out if maybe they do want to move Amari Burney more over to star and let him and Trey Dean split those reps more evenly. And, you know, they can drop Jeremiah Moon back to outside linebacker if they need to. Bringing in John Gennard from Louisville gave them more depth at Buck. They don't have to have Jeremiah Moon there. If Britton Cox gets a waiver to play, he can play at Buck. So Jeremiah Moon all of a sudden is able to move back a little bit in linebacker and drop back, and I think that's going to help him a lot.
Yeah, you mentioned Moon. According to a source, they told GT that he graded one of the highest defenders. Him and C.J. Henderson actually graded the highest among the defense for that last scrimmage that they had. And you mentioned the biggest question for you was secondary. Mm-hmm. My biggest question is the offensive line. I think, no doubt, we know who the first team O-line is going to be. Now the question is John Delance going to be healthy enough? Right now, Dan Mullen says he's expected to play, but again, we don't know until game time. Mullen does keep a lot of stuff close to the chest. I think the big question is who's the first guy off the bench, and I think Richard Garage is the one that comes to mind. I think a lot of people have been impressed by him and what he does. Kyrie Campbell said that he's the one that he's most impressive, calling him very aggressive. A lot of people who've heard Richard Garage's interviews during his recruitment probably wouldn't say he's aggressive because he's such a quiet kid, but a lot of people have been impressed by him. And so is CJ Henderson, but he's definitely aggressive on the field. And I think one of the other guys that I would actually really want to focus on is Michael Tarquin and Ethan White, those two freshmen, especially Ethan White. I've heard a lot of good things about Ethan White, not just about his weight, but about how much he has learned in a short time. And I think that is the biggest question going into Miami with such a talented front seven that the Canes have, is how can they deal with that? And then next is how can they make the jump to the next game? So that's the big question going into the season and going against Miami. And speaking of Miami, I'm going to pick the O-line versus D-line as my key matchup. I think both sides for both teams, actually, Miami's O-line is very, very inexperienced, while Florida's D-line is experienced, and the same goes to Florida. So I think whoever wins that will win the battle, and I end up choosing Florida.
Yeah, I think that Florida runs away with it clearly in my predictions to you as well. I've said that before. I think that when you look at Miami's secondary situation, just having 4 scholarship defensive backs, and then you look at Florida's skill position and Felipe Franks coming back, being a fourth-year player, I mean, it's clear that if Florida can throw on the Canes, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. That's why I think that the key to the game early on is establishing the run, because if they can establish the run, wear down Miami's front seven, then Florida's going to open it up, and you're really going to see kind of Florida run away with it. I predicted 42-13 the other day, and I'm sticking with that prediction.
Nice. Yeah, I'm going to just say the same thing y'all did, but in a little bit of a different way. I think it comes down to the trenches. I think Florida wins the battle through the air on both sides of the ball. Felipe Franks is going to come in as definitely the more experienced quarterback. We saw what he did over those last 4 games, and Dan Mullen said on Monday that Felipe has made huge strides this offseason, and Dan Mullen doesn't hand out compliments to his quarterback lightly. And then he's got that wide receiver core that top to bottom is, one of the deepest Florida's had in years. So Florida's going to win the battle through the air on the offense. They're going to win it on the defense because, Florida's secondary, CJ, Marco, they're going to come in and they're going to see that freshman quarterback, and I think they're going to pick on him all day. It's going to come down to the trenches. Miami's front seven is their best, is the strongest part of their team. But I also think that's a little relative to what the rest of their team is offering right now. And so Florida's offensive line, yeah, there's a lot of questions, but if John Hevesy is able to do with them through the offseason what he did with that unit last offseason, then I think Florida's going to be able to run away with it. I like Graham's score. That kind of keeps with what they did against Florida State and Michigan. I would say I think it's going to be a tough game, 35-14 maybe. I lived through that 2013 Florida-Miami game, and that was one of the more miserable experiences of my life. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think there's no reason Florida should lose this game. So I'm going to go 35-14.
I'm going to be hated on our board. I'm still picking Florida, don't worry, but I'm going to pick a closer matchup. I think the reason is I'm still having a lot of questions about that O-line. I think it's going to take them a long time to get gelled up and have that chemistry, and I'm worried if John DeLance doesn't start, then you have Stone Forsythe possibly moving to the other side, and then you have Richard Garage starting at left tackle. That is my prediction rather than having Michael Tarquin in, because I don't think you want to start a true freshman. But so that's my question is what happens if there's an injury really early in the game, and how cohesive is that O-line going to be in the game time atmosphere? How loud is it? They're going to have false starts. They're going to have issues early on. And that's something that we saw last year with the O-line too. They got better progressively. So I'm thinking that's why I'm going to pick maybe a 1 touchdown difference, so maybe like 24-17. But I think Florida is still going to win. So thank you so much, Graham and Kassidy. And obviously stay with Gators territory as we continue to count down to the big Miami-Florida matchup.